What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 7 of StaleMates. There's been a lot of he said, she said going on in the Twitter world, the Twitter wrestling world, about the Hawkeye Wrestling Club women's program, whether or not they had their funding cut or whether they didn't. Mark Perry leaves and goes to Arizona State. Thomas Gillen leaves and goes to the Nittany Lions Wrestling Club. So today, this video, I'm going to try to narrow down the facts about what we know and what we don't know and who said what when it comes to the funding of the women's wrestling program for the Hawkeye Wrestling Club. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, all this kind of starts on April 9th at 2:20 when rogue reporter and founder of the Wrestling Room, a wrestling-based forum, Mr. Pat Miniow on Twitter reports that the Hawkeye Wrestling Club cut off their girls program due to funding, and Mark Perry, the head coach of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club, is to leave and take a position at Arizona State, and he's taking Allie Reagan, Michaela Beck, Forrest Molinari, and Kayla Miracle with him to the desert as a result, which we do know that ended up being true. Mark Perry did announce that he is going to Arizona State. So a couple hours later at 4 o'clock, Mark Perry actually quote retweeted that and says that that is fake news, which I think he announced that same day that he was going to Arizona State. So it leads him saying fake news leads everybody to believe that either the two other things in that tweet were that the Hawkeye Wrestling Club was cutting off their girls program, or the other thing that could have been fake news was the girls following him. So people didn't really know. So Tom Brands does kind of a media run to clear up the confusion, where he goes on and says that on I believe Track Wrestling or the Open Mat, where he says that the Hawkeye Wrestling Club is not cutting the funding and they have unlimited budget. And he goes on to talk about how much support he has for the women's wrestling program. So in comes Christian Piles, Flow Wrestling content director and Flow Radio Live podcast host, not to be confused with a journalist. And he kind of dogpiles on top of Pat Miniow and says,
death, taxes.
And Miniow deleting fake news, because Pat Miniow actually went back and deleted his original tweet about the report of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club cutting the funding for the women's wrestling. That wasn't enough for Mr. Piles. Mr. Piles then goes and follows this up with an 8-minute diss track going on Mr. Pat Miniow, giving him a business lesson, talking about basically how Flow Wrestling doesn't really care if they're first or not. Pat Miniow's in a race with himself to get news out first. He talks about how they're basically trying to flex on him. In the video, he says he's not flexing on him, but he's kind of saying at the same time that news comes to us. We don't chase down news. We don't care if we're first. We're going to get the traffic regardless. Kind of an entertaining watch. So if you want to watch it, he is at CPiles on Instagram. Well, it still wasn't enough for Mr. Piles. At this point, he's got Pat Miniow in a body bag, and he's claiming that Miniow is not a good guy after asking thousands of users on Facebook on a wrestling page to harass a former Flow Wrestling employee and self-proclaimed greatest mind in wrestling, Willie Saylor, by giving out Willie's personal phone number and home address on a wrestling forum. To which Pat Miniow says, I didn't have Willie's number then. I didn't have his number until a few nights ago, or till last night, in this tweet, and claims that Christian Piles is reaching. So Piles provides some hashtag receipts or a screenshot of the allegation that Piles had on Mr. Miniow, where he did tell people to text Willie an egg emoji at 9 p.m. and provides Willie's personal information. Not a good look for Mr. Miniow. Let's get back to the subject at hand. So a Twitter user on April 10th at Cody Heathman tweeted he deleted his post referring to Miniow after Perry shared it, calling it fake news. If it wasn't fake, he wouldn't have deleted it. Pat Miniow responds, this is indeed not fake news. Perry was protecting his girls and I was asked to delete it. So Pat Miniow is kind of standing by his notion of, or his original tweet, saying that the only reason he deleted it was out of protection of the girls and he was asked to take it down. On the Hawkeye Report Wrestling Forum, Willie Saylor, aka Smalls103, claims he also was asked to take down his reporting on the subject at hand from Randy Novak, a Hawkeye Wrestling fanatic and Miller Lite taste tester. On April 25th, 2020, just as things weren't looking so good for Mr. Miniao, Allie Reagan joins the Women Wrestling 2 podcast hosted by Alexis Porter and Arian Carpio, where she says the women of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club were told on a Zoom call with the Iowa coaches that they were going to be paid through July, leading them to believe that their time in Iowa City had expired. On April 25th, Miniao wastes no time rising from his grave, going straight into the mouth of the dragon that is the Hawkeye Wrestling Report, claiming that Allie Reagan exposed his Hawkeye Wrestling Club, where he posted the link to the podcast in the forum, and then he did spend the rest of his day tweeting at Christian Piles and Flow Wrestling, claiming that he was right and they all owe him an apology. And then, a couple days later, Pat Miniao wakes up, and at 8:56 a.m., he tweets that Mark Perry has gone back and deleted the tweet calling him fake news. Let the purge commence. Dead emoji. So the tweet that Mark Perry had tweeted earlier in the video that I talked about Mark Perry said fake news actually got deleted, or he deleted it. So how the turntables?
Well. How the turntables?
Thomas Gilman joins Team Miniao, so the momentum is going back in his favor. Thomas Gilman likes a tweet of Pat Miniao's where he is disgusted by the Hawkeye fans calling Allie Reagan and the women of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club liars. Thomas Gilman also posts a tweet of his own saying, "I support and back Allie Reagan at Lizzo Truth Hurts." It's kind of funny to see him, one, kind of go at the Hawkeye Wrestling Club, and to quote Lizzo. It's kind of funny. But then Christian Piles tweets that he got a quote from Tom Brands to clear up some confusion about the Girls Wrestle 2 podcast, which is actually the Women Wrestle 2 podcast, regarding funding of the women's wrestling at the Hawkeye Wrestling program, where he tweets, and I quote, "The Hawkeye Wrestling Club women made the decision to leave Iowa City, and we support their decision. If they decide to return to Iowa City and train in the Hawkeye Wrestling Club, we will support that decision also." April 29th, 1:33 p.m., Kayla Miracle, member of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club, not so anonymous member, tweets, "And yes, I am the anonymous Hawkeye Wrestling Club member that said Hawkeye Wrestling Club did not cut the women's funding, and I know that I will be welcome there as long as I want to be there." 2 hours after Kayla Miracle puts out her statement, Allie Reagan claims people are taking her truth out of context by saying Brands and company don't support women's wrestling, and that is totally not the case. She doubles down that she was to be paid through July, and after that, it was time to move on. So what do we know here? We do know that Allie Reagan claims on the Women Wrestle 2 podcast that they were going to be paid through July, and after that, it was time for them to all move on, and that they were going to be headed to Arizona with Coach Perry. We know that Tom Brands says he supports the girls' decision to leave, claiming the situation is similar to when he left Virginia Tech, and they are not cutting the funding to the Hawkeye Women's Wrestling Program. So what we don't know is, we don't know the semantics of the situation. Were the girls asked to leave? Were they told they could stay but weren't going to be paid? Is Iowa indeed cutting the funding of the women's wrestling program, which Tom Brands, the head wrestling coach, and Kayla Miracle, former member of the Hawkeye Wrestling Club, both say no to that? Or is Allie Reagan lying and the women chose to follow Perry and did not get asked to leave, nor was their funding cut, which I don't really believe that also, because that's something that can be easily proven, and I don't think she really has anything to gain by that. Another theory is that the girls were asked to leave so that they could bring in a different group of girls, which I think at this point is probably the most likely scenario, because the other ones involve somebody lying, which, not saying people don't lie, but I just don't see where anybody would really have to gain from that. So I tried to get everything in order. I think the main thing that we still don't really know is whether or not the funding was cut or not, and what terms did they leave on. I think there's a lot that's going to probably come out. What's making it worse in all this is Tom Brand still hasn't kind of came out and directly answer the question whether or not funding was cut and why they were asked, or why they were told that they were no longer going to be paid after July, and what the actual situation is. Are they going to bring in more women's wrestling? I don't know, but hope you guys like this video. Hope it wasn't too confusing. I encourage you guys to do some of your own investigating if you guys were confused. I did my best to try to get everything in order and try to get the meat and potatoes of the situation. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe and all that jazz. We're at StaleMates Show on Instagram and Twitter, StaleMates on YouTube. Thank you for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you.